The smell of stale coffee and fried onions clung to the air, a familiar perfume for the end of a 16-hour shift. Chloe pushed a stray curl from her forehead, the fabric of her light blue scrub sticking to her skin with a day's worth of exhaustion. All she wanted was a booth, a plate of something greasy, and 5 minutes where no one needed anything from her. The diner was mostly empty, a late-night sanctuary for the city's ghosts. And tonight, one of them sat at the counter. He was folded in on himself, a study in grime and worn flannel. His hair was a dark, matted mess, and a thick, untrimmed beard obscured most of his face. The owner, a balding man named Sal whose patience wore thin after midnight, was leaning over the counter, his voice a low, angry hiss. "I told you no money, no food. This isn't a shelter. Get out." The man didn't move. He just stared at his own chapped hands resting on the countertop, his stillness an act of defiance. Sal's face was turning a blotchy red. He was about to reach for the man's arm. Chloe heard herself speak before she'd made a conscious decision to. "Put his meal on my tab, Sal." Sal's had snapped toward her. His glare softened slightly when he saw the scrubs. "Nurses got a pass most of the time. Chloe, you don't have to do that. This guy's here every other night." "It's fine," she said, her voice heavy with a weariness that went bone deep. She slid onto a stool 2 seats down from the man. "Just give him a coffee, and whatever the special is." Sal grumbled, but turned to the grill. The man at the counter slowly lifted his head. For the first time, he looked at her. Chloe had expected the vacant, hollowed-out look of the men she sometimes treated in the ER, the ones lost to the street and their own minds. These eyes were different. They were dark, almost black, and shockingly clear. They weren't empty. They were watchful. An unsettling intelligence burned in them, a predator's focus that felt entirely out of place in that worn, dirty face. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't gratitude. It was an acknowledgement, as if they'd just completed a business transaction. She turned away, a prickle of unease on her neck. She ordered her own food and ate in silence, pretending to scroll through her phone. But she was aware of him, of the way he moved with a deliberate economy, his hands steady as he lifted the heavy ceramic mug to his lips. There was a precision in his gestures that contradicted his appearance. She told herself it was nothing. She was just tired seeing things. Paramedics brought in people from all walks of life. She knew better than to judge. When she paid her bill, Sal added his meal without comment. She left a generous tip and walked out into the cool, damp air of the city at 3 a.m. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows on the wet pavement. Her apartment was only 4 blocks away, a walk she'd made 1,000 times. Tonight it felt different. The silence felt heavier. She heard the footsteps behind her as she turned onto her street. They were quiet, professional. Not the shuffling gait of someone homeless, but the measured tread of someone who knew how to move without being noticed. Her heart didn't race. It did a slow, heavy thud against her ribs, a drumbeat of alarm. She clutched her keys in her fist, the metal edges digging into her palm. She didn't speed up. She didn't look back. That was how you became prey. A long, black sedan slid to the curb ahead of her, its engine a low, expensive purr. 2 men in dark suits got out. They moved with the same fluid menace as the footsteps behind her. She was boxed in. This wasn't a mugging. This was something else. "We just want to talk," the first man said. His smile was all teeth. Chloe backed away slowly, her eyes darting for an escape. There was an alley to her left, dark and filled with dumpsters. A dead end. The man behind her was closer now. She could feel his presence. Then, a voice cut through the tension, low and calm. "That's far enough." The men from the car froze. Their professional smiles vanished, replaced by masks of disbelief and then fear. Chloe risked a glance over her shoulder. It was him, the man from the diner. He had shed the defeated posture like a coat, standing straight and tall in the dim light. The shadows carved new lines into his face, erasing the vagrant and revealing the stark, angular bones beneath. Those dark, intelligent eyes were now chips of ice. You are a long way from home, he said, his English perfect, accented with the clipped precision of his native Tokyo. The first suited man swallowed hard. We were told you were out of the picture. Your information was wrong, the man from the diner stated. It was not a conversation. It was a verdict. He moved. It wasn't a rush. It was a flow, a terrifyingly graceful unfolding of violence. Before the first man could even reach for the weapon inside his jacket, the homeless man had closed the distance. There was a glint of metal in his hand, something small and sharp, a sound like tearing fabric. The first man crumpled to the ground without a cry. The second man went for his gun, but he was too slow. A brutal, efficient sequence of movements left him choking on the pavement beside his partner. The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe stood frozen, the keys still clenched in her hand. He stood over the two bodies, his breathing even. He hadn't broken a sweat. He turned to face her, and the streetlight caught the side of his face. He was younger than she'd thought. And under the grime, his features were sharp, aristocratic, carved from stone. He took a step toward her. She flinched. They saw you with me, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. They saw you pay for my meal. In their world, that makes you an asset, a liability. He wiped the small blade on the jacket of one of the fallen men, and it disappeared back into his sleeve. You cannot go home. You cannot go to work. Your life, the one you had 5 minutes ago, is over. He gestured toward the far end of the street, where another black car, identical to the first, had just pulled up. You will come with me now. That is not a request. That was the moment everything changed. Chloe looked from the bodies on the ground to the cold, unreadable face of the man who had just saved her by destroying her world. She had a choice: scream and bring the police into a world they couldn't comprehend, or get into the car. Her survival instinct, honed by years in the chaotic world of emergency medicine, made the decision for her. She walked toward the car. The penthouse was a shock. After the grit of the diner and the violence of the street, the sterile, minimalist expanse of glass and steel felt like another planet. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a glittering panorama of the city, a kingdom laid out at their feet. The air smelled of nothing, scrubbed clean of life. There was no art on the walls, no personal trinkets, only clean lines and the cold gleam of chrome. He led her to a sprawling white leather sofa. "Seat." She sat, her blue scrubs looking garish and out of place in the monochromatic landscape. He disappeared into another room, and she was left alone with the silence and the view. A man entered, dressed in a pristine black suit, bowing low to her before placing a tray on the glass table. It held a bottle of water and a single, steaming white towel. Chloe stared at it, her mind struggling to connect the man covered in street filth to this silent, deferential soldier and this palace in the sky. He returned, transformed. The grime was gone, washed away to reveal the man beneath. His dark hair was wet, combed back from a face that was severe and beautiful. He wore a simple black t-shirt and gray trousers that hung on his frame with an understated expense. Now that he was clean, she could see the faint lines of ink coiling around his neck, disappearing beneath the collar of his shirt. More ink covered the backs of his hands and snaked up his forearms. Dragons and cherry blossoms, rendered in exquisite, terrifying detail. He sat in the armchair opposite her, the city lights framing him like a dark halo. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply watched her, his gaze as intense and analytical as it had been in the diner. "My name is Rio," he said finally. "You have placed yourself in the middle of a war, Ms. Chloe," she managed, her voice a dry whisper. "My name is Chloe." "Chloe," he repeated, and the way he said it was different. He tasted the syllables, claimed them. "The men who followed you were from the Inagawakai. Arrival clan. They believe I am weak, that my position is vulnerable. They were testing the borders of my territory." "Your territory?" "This city," he said, with a quiet finality that left no room for doubt. He was the head of the local Yakuza, an Oyabun, the infamous boss she'd read about in sensational news articles, the one the police could never touch. and she had bought him a cheeseburger. "Why were you all like that?" "In the diner?" she asked, the question tumbling out before she could stop it. His face gave nothing away. "There is a traitor in my organization. Someone who has been feeding information to my enemies. I needed to see who would move against me if they thought I was truly gone." He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "No one in my world offers kindness without an agenda. You did. They saw it. Now they think you are my new agenda." For the next few days, the penthouse became her prison. It was a luxurious cage, but a cage nonetheless. She was given a room with a bed softer than any she'd ever slept in, and a bathroom that looked like a spa. Clothes appeared in the closet, simple, elegant pieces in silk and cashmere that felt alien against her skin. She was never left alone, but Rio's men were ghosts, silent and watchful, never speaking to her directly. Rio himself was a constant, unsettling presence. He worked from a large desk in the main living area, taking calls in rapid, guttural Japanese and holding quiet, intense meetings with his lieutenants. She saw the absolute power he wielded. He moved through his violent world like it was a language he was born speaking, never clumsy, never panicked, only quiet and lethal. She learned to read the silences between them. She learned the story of his wound not from his words, but from his actions. There was a single, framed photograph on his desk, turned away from the room. One night, when he thought she was asleep on the sofa, she saw him pick it up. He traced the glass with one finger, his expression, for a fleeting second, unguarded. It was a mask of profound, aching loss. The next evening he spoke of it. Not to her, but to the room, as if she were merely a piece of the furniture. His name was Kazuo, he said, his voice flat. He was staring out at the city. "My second. We were raised together. He was my brother in all but blood." Chloe stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. "The Inagawakai made a move on one of our warehouses. It was a trap, meant for me. Kazuo went in my place. I was delayed by a meeting that, I now know, was orchestrated by the traitor. By the time I arrived, he stopped. The silence stretched, heavy and cold. I was not there to protect my own. There is no greater shame." That was it. The vulnerability he carried, the core of his isolation. A shame so deep he'd exiled himself to the streets to root out the one who caused it. He began to see her, really see her, not just as a problem to be managed. He'd find her staring out the window and place a cup of tea on the table beside her, without a word. One evening, as a chill seeped through the glass walls, he draped a heavy cashmere throw over her shoulders. His fingers brushed her neck, a fleeting touch of warmth that sent a jolt through her entire body. It was small, almost deniable, but it was there. An opportunity came a week into her captivity. A large meeting, all of Rio's lieutenants present. The security was focused inward on the meeting. A service elevator she'd noticed was left unguarded. This was her chance. Her old life, her freedom, was just one button press away. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slipped down the hallway. Her hand was on the call button, the metal cool beneath her trembling fingers. She could leave, disappear, find a new city, a new name. Then she heard it, a crash from the penthouse. A shouted order in Japanese, sharp with alarm. She should have run. Every rational part of her brain screamed at her to press the button and escape. But she thought of the look on his face as he stared at that photograph. The shame he carried. The quiet way he'd covered her with the blanket. She turned and ran back. She burst back into the living area to a scene of controlled chaos. Rio stood in the center of the room, a deep gash on his forearm dripping blood onto the white marble floor. Standing before him was one of his own lieutenants, a man named Mori, his face a snarl of desperation. Mori held a pistol, its barrel wavering between Rio and his other men, who had their own weapons drawn, creating a deadly standoff. "You were a father to me," Mori spat, his voice cracking. "And you let him die. You let Kazuo die to save yourself. You are the traitor," Rio said. His voice was dangerously soft. The blood from his arm didn't seem to bother him at all. You set the trap. You delayed me. Mori's eyes were wild. He saw Chloe then, standing in the doorway. His desperate gaze flickered to her, and a new, ugly calculation entered it. He could use her. Leverage. A hostage. He lunged for her. Rio moved faster. He didn't try to intercept Mori. He threw himself directly at him, a brutal, physical tackle that sent both men crashing into the glass coffee table. It shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot. For a horrifying second, as they wrestled on the floor amidst the broken glass, Chloe thought Mori had gotten the upper hand. She saw the gun pressed against Rio's side. She thought he was gone. A cold, sharp terror unlike anything she had ever felt seized her. It was a visceral, unwelcome revelation. She did not want him to die. In the struggle, the pistol skittered across the marble floor, landing only a few feet from her. Mori and Rio were locked in a deadly embrace. Rio's men held their fire, afraid of hitting their boss.
Chloe didn't think.
She acted. Her foot shot out, connecting with the gun and sending it sliding across the polished floor, directly to the hand of Rio's nearest man. It was over in an instant. The man scooped up the weapon. The distraction was enough. Rio gained control, disarming Mori with a sickening crack of bone. Two of his soldiers hauled the traitor to his feet. The line was crossed. She had chosen a side. She had helped to kill her. There was no going back. Rio rose to his feet, shards of glass clinging to his clothes. He looked at her, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that stripped her bare. He ignored his men, ignored the bleeding traitor. He saw only her. Later, after Mori had been taken away to a fate she didn't want to imagine, they were alone again. The shattered table had been cleared away, the blood cleaned from the floor. The silence was different now. It was not empty. It was filled with the choice she had made. He stood by the window, his back to her. His arm had been bandaged, a stark white strip against his dark skin. You should have run, he said, his voice rough. I know, she whispered. The admission hung in the air between them. He turned slowly to face her. No one has ever come back for me. It was not a declaration of love. It was something more dangerous. A confession of a long-held solitude, now broken. He took a step closer, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the faint, clean scent of antiseptic and something else, something that was just him, sandalwood and cold steel. Why? He asked, the single word a demand. I don't know, she answered, and it was the truest thing she had ever said. His hand came up, not to touch her, but to hover inches from her face. His thumb brushed her cheek, a touch so light it was barely there, yet it set her entire nervous system on fire. That was the moment she knew she wasn't a prisoner of his circumstances anymore. She was a prisoner of him. The war, however, was not over. The Inagawakai, emboldened by the internal strife, escalated their attacks. They were no longer testing the borders. They were trying to burn the empire down. And they had a new target. A package arrived for Rio. Inside was not a threat, but a photograph. It was of her, taken through the window of her old apartment. On the back, a simple message was written in Japanese. Rio read it, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of raw, uncontrolled fury in his eyes. What does it say? She asked. He looked at her, his face a mask of cold resolve. It says, we know what you value. The final confrontation was inevitable. The Inagawakai proposed a meeting to discuss a truce. It was a transparent trap, designed to lure Rio out into the open. He intended to walk right into it. It is a matter of honor, he told her, his voice leaving no room for argument. I will not hide while they threaten what is mine. Chloe watched his men prepare, checking weapons, coordinating routes. They were soldiers preparing for a battle they expected their general to lead from the front. But she saw what they didn't. She was a nurse. She was trained to see patterns, to diagnose the illness beneath the symptoms. The location for the meeting, a neutral warehouse at the docks, was too obvious. The timing too perfect. It wasn't a trap for him. It was a diversion. They're not going to be there, she said, stepping in front of him as he was about to leave. "This is to draw you out. All of you." His second-in-command, a stern man named Daisuke, looked at her with dismissive contempt. "This is not your concern. They're going to hit this building," she insisted, her gaze locked on Ryo. "While you're all at the docks, they'll come here. They don't want to kill you in a firefight. They want to take your throne while you're not on it." Ryo studied her face, searching for something. He saw the fierce intelligence, the certainty in her eyes. The same competence she must have shown in the chaos of an emergency room. He had seen it when she kicked the gun across the floor. He saw it now. He made a decision. He spoke in rapid Japanese to Daisuke, who paled, then bowed sharply and began barking new orders into his phone. The plan had changed. Ryo would go to the warehouse, but with only a skeleton crew. The bulk of his forces would remain, hidden in and around the penthouse. Chloe's heart hammered in her chest. She had just gambled with all their lives based on a hunch. The penthouse was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. She waited with Ryo in the darkened living room, the city lights a distant, indifferent audience. The attack came just as she predicted. Explosions from the ground floor rocked the skyscraper. Gunfire erupted in the hallways. The Nagawakai had brought their full force, expecting an empty fortress. Instead, they walked into an ambush. The fight was brutal and short. Ryo moved through it with the lethal grace she'd first seen in that alleyway. But he wasn't alone. Chloe, armed with the knowledge of the building's layout she'd memorized during her confinement, directed his men through service corridors, cutting off the attackers' retreat. At a critical moment, when a group of intruders breached their floor, she shattered a decorative vase, the loud noise drawing their fire, giving Ryo the split second he needed to eliminate the threat.
She was not a bystander.
She was an active part of his defense. She was saving him, just as he had saved her. When it was over, the penthouse was a wreck of shattered glass and scarred marble, the air thick with the smell of cordite. The rival clan was broken. Ryo stood in the center of the devastation, unharmed. The cost of this victory was written across the room, but his empire was secure. He walked toward her, stepping over the debris as if it wasn't there. He stopped in front of her, his dark eyes holding hers. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch no longer hesitant, but firm, possessive. "A claim." "I told you that your old life was over," he said, his voice low and raw. "I was wrong. It was not over. It was waiting to be forged into something new." He tilted her chin up. "You belong in my world now, not as a prisoner, as its center." Her old life was a ghost. The nurse in the light blue scrubs was a memory. That woman saved lives with medicine and procedure. This woman had helped a crime lord win a war. There was no going back. She had paid for his meal with a few dollars, and in return, he had paid for her with a new reality, bought with blood and loyalty. She had not asked for it, but now that it was hers, she found she did not want to let it go. He led her out onto the balcony, away from the wreckage. The city spread before them, a tapestry of light and shadow.
His city.
Their city. She was no longer wearing the silks he had provided. During the fight, she had changed back into a simple t-shirt and trousers.
She was not a doll to be dressed up.
She was a partner. He stood behind her, his presence a solid wall of heat and power. He placed his hand over hers where it rested on the cool metal railing. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a brand, a quiet, possessive, and absolute declaration that this, all of it, was now theirs. The choice had been made long ago, in a greasy diner, over a cup of coffee. Everything since had been inevitable,